On April 14, 2023, a $31 billion transaction would result in the combination of beloved Class 1's Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern. With the new title, CPKC, the first truly north-south transcontinental railroad to connect Canada, the United States, and Mexico would emerge. An event of this magnitude would naturally have to be commemorated in some form, and CPKC could not have chosen a better way to celebrate. Flashback to 2022. The current CEO of CPKC, Keith Creel, announced the plans of the Final Spike Steam Tour. For the first time in well over a decade, the pride of Canadian Pacific's fleet would grace the main line once more in 2024. Fittingly given the title Empress, the 2816 and the Royal Canadian Pacific Business Train would embark on a journey that spans thousands of miles from Calgary all the way southward through the U.S. and finally into Mexico. In May of 2024, we would link up with the 2816 in Kansas City and for 2 days follow the train southbound for about 550 miles, ending our chase in Shreveport, Louisiana. Paired with informative narration, you'll be getting a front row seat of this beautiful Hudson-type steam locomotive traversing over the former KCS main line. This is easily the steam event of the decade, as well as the beginning of a promising future for North America's newest Class 1. This is Canadian Pacific 2816, the Final Spike Steam Tour. Kansas City, former HQ of the Kansas City Southern, now serving as the United States headquarters for CPKC. The railroading history buried in the grounds of this city is truly immeasurable. A large portion of said history lies within the walls of Union Station, which is advertising the current history being made, CPKC's Final Spike Steam Tour. On May 18, 2024, CPKC hosted a display event right here at Union for the general public to observe a truly magnificent piece of machinery. Paired along with the Empress for the event was CP9375, the very first locomotive to be painted into CPKC's new corporate paint scheme. While the Empress is tucked behind the passenger cars being serviced, 9375 will be disconnected from the consist and stored in Kanoki Yard to await its first assignment hauling freight for the continent. The sun has yet to rise on the morning of May 21st, but the dedicated steam crew is already hard at work making preparations for a long day. While this vintage steamer is far more impressive to observe than a diesel, the amount of maintenance to keep her running efficiently far exceeds the needs of modern engines. After several days of routine boiler work, the display event at Union Station, and hopefully some well-earned downtime, it's time for 2816 to leave Kansas City to make way for its next display event in Shreveport, Louisiana. In total, it will be a 2-day run to Duramus Yard. The excursion will be overnighting in the small town of Heavener, Oklahoma. Out of Kansas City, the train will begin on the Pittsburgh subdivision and continue on to the Heavener subdivision. The second day would see the steam tour traverse the Shreveport subdivision to its namesake city. Overall, we will be following the train over 500 miles. The sun has risen and the 2816 has departed Kanoki Yard. We decided to begin by the absolutely iconic Blue Parkway Arch Bridge. This beautiful piece of architecture was built for the KCS in 1928, making this bridge 96 years old. This bridge was a staple when it came to marketing material for the railroad. You can find several marketing advertisements featuring the flagship Southern Belle passenger service here.
An oil well is about the only thing you can hear in this quiet spot just outside of Belton, Missouri, but that will soon change with the incoming fleet of vehicles chasing the locomotive and, of course, the sounds of the railroad. Ahead of our steam train is Daily Manifest M280, which is Mexico bound. CP 8876, the Olympic torch motor leads a Southern Belle southbound. Around 10 to 15 minutes after clearing, 2816 would pass by, but not without the sound of a helicopter above drowning out all of our sound. The 2816 is an H-1B class 464 Hudson type locomotive that was built in 1930. The Montreal Locomotive Works built 10 of these H-1Bs. When first introduced, these Hudsons were assigned to Canadian Pacific's premier passenger service between Winnipeg and Ontario. While not streamlined, the Empress and her 9 sister engines would display true class while hauling passengers across the beautiful countryside of Canada. 2816 is the only H-1B to survive. The 2816 was demoted to secondary passenger runs once the Royal Hudson semi-streamlined locomotives arrived in 1937. The demotions would continue into the 1950s, which would find 2816 assigned to commuter service, though CP did give the locomotive a slight overhaul, with the tender being replaced with one of the Royal Hudsons. By its retirement in 1960, 2816 had traveled well over 2 million miles. Here we see 2816 in Amsterdam, Missouri. While traveling along its route, the locomotive must undergo routine servicing stops. These stops often include running gear inspections, along with the greasing of the rods. The 2816 would be spared from the scrapper's torch when the man behind the formation of Steamtown, USA, Francis Nelson Blount, purchased the Hudson in 1963. For decades, the Empress sat dormant as a static display piece. Flash forward to the 1990s. Steam programs were commonly seen across the continent, and the acting Canadian Pacific CEO, Robert Ritchie, wanted to implement these practices with his railroad to pull the beautiful Royal Canadian Pacific business train. A complete rebuild of the 2816 was required, along with the help of several organizations such as TVRM and the operators of SP-4449 and SP&S 700. With a restoration this big, there were several huge tasks that had to be completed, such as converting the locomotive from being a coal-fired engine to oil burning. This restoration in total would become one of Canada's most expensive projects, with a hefty cost of $2 million. In the summer of 2001, 2816 would be fired up for the first time in 4 decades after passing its boiler test. After several runs along the Canadian Pacific Main Line, the locomotive gained its title, the Empress. The nickname was inspired by the fleet of ships operated by the Canadian Pacific. Several ships were given names such as Empress of Ireland, Empress of Australia, and the list goes on. For several years, the 2816 would proudly traverse the rails of the CP system. In 2012, new upper management had arrived to the Canadian Pacific, and the steam program was of little interest. So unfortunately, the Empress would remain stored behind closed doors for several years. In 2020, 8 long years after the steam program was discontinued, the 2816 would be fired up for a test run and film a production for CP's Holiday Train due to the cancellation of its typical run due to the pandemic. Despite seeing it as a glimmer of hope for rail fans and steam enthusiasts, it was stated that there were no future plans to run excursions. The following year would bring the announcement of the proposed merger between the Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Southern. Current CEO Keith Creel announced that if the merger was approved, the Empress would once again be fired up and sent on a historic tour from Calgary to Mexico City. The steam team would have to be assembled once more when the excursion was announced, and a heavy overhaul would commence. After 2 years of hard work, in 2023, 2816 would begin a series of test runs out of Calgary, and finally the locomotive was deemed ready to go for this historic excursion, which brings us here to the present. Our last shot of the day would be in Poteau, Oklahoma, not too far north of 2816's destination of Heavener. Since it was about 13 hours of chasing and our hotel was here in town, we called the day a success and got some rest in preparation for the second day. Welcome to the CPKC yard in Heavener, Oklahoma. This is a familiar location for many rail fans. Once a southbound train departs this yard, it will soon face the grueling grades of Rich Mountain before continuing onward to Shreveport. In the hours before the scheduled 9 a.m. departure time, the steam crew is making preparations to ensure the locomotive is ready for a true test.
Yeah, that doesn't mean they're going to stick to it though.
The tracks that lead into the yard are manually operated, so a switchman is sent out to line the tracks for departure. At 8:55 a.m., the familiar twin whistle blast sounds off and it's go time. A large number of Heavener residents were able to come out and get the privilege of seeing the Empress slowly easing onto the Shreveport subdivision. With the Ouachita Mountains making an excellent backdrop, here we see the Empress rounding the curve at milepost 349 in Stapp, where its battle against the grades is just beginning. The image quality is always the priority in footage, but it's always a welcome bonus to have great audio paired along with it. 2816 had some serious stack talk in this portion of the chase, and those two F units notched up sounded almost as good. The excursion has successfully conquered Rich Mountain, and now is seen gliding through this field just north of Hatfield. Also, keep a lookout in the vestibules of the cars, and you may spot good old Cyrus posing for the cameras. It isn't a passenger train run on former KCS rails if you don't see him at some point during the chase.
Guys, y'all be careful.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming over.
If you didn't know that rail fans are committed to getting the best possible shot, maybe Peyton here doing a little groundskeeping will help you understand. Thanks to his innovation, several of us were able to get a sensational roll-by at the impressive curve that resides in Wicks, Arkansas. While in DeQueen, we saw the 2816 cross over the shared diamond with the short line railroad DQE. Here in Ashdown, we'd opt to set up closer to this diamond that's utilized by the CPKC and KRR. In fact, one of their trains was waiting for the Empress to clear so it can make its way west into Oklahoma. We would try to acquire some pacing footage on the stretch south of Ashdown, but unfortunately, the results weren't all that great since most of the crowd was trying to do the same thing. But we would get one final shot in Mooringsport, Louisiana, before parting ways with the Final Spike Steam Tour. I hope you've enjoyed this video on Canadian Pacific 2816. It was an absolute success in my books, and I gotta give a major shout out to the fine folks at CPKC who put in countless hours of work and planning for this historic run. Chasing mainline steam is no easy task, but I was with some great friends, so all in all, it was an incredible 2 days. If you did enjoy the video, please leave a like down below, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Until the next time, my friends, I'll be seeing you somewhere out there along the rails, and as always, thanks for watching.